Okay, this is Adobe Experience Design or Adobe Xd. As I mentioned in previous tutorials, it's still in beta. Currently, it's June 2017. On the Apple Mac, it was developed there first, so it's a little bit further ahead in its development over on the certainly for Windows. So you might find if you are a Windows user using this beta version, you might find that some of the functionality that is currently in the Mac version is not available, but I think that gap is narrowing down. And also, as mentioned before, because it's being developed, you might have some frustrations because some functionality just isn't there that you would expect it to be there. Also, if you're accustomed to using the Sketch app on Apple Mac, which is a really good program that, it does quite a lot. It's a developed program that you might be frustrated you can't do some of the design functions in XD that you can have on doing it in Sketch. But I think it's in development and those are improving all the time. Certainly when they first introduced it, they didn't have layers, and now they've got layers, and they were quite frustrating to not have those. But it's constantly, I think almost every 3 to 4 weeks, it's being updated. Okay, so I've opened it here. As I mentioned before, it's on I'm using an Apple Mac here, so there might be some slight differences if you're a Windows user, but the core principles are the same. You open it up and it gives you a number of preset options. They're just for, seem to be for 2 Apple devices and just doing a bog standard web interface. Also, if you click on these down arrow here, it will give you other options for other devices that's similar to it, or you can create a custom size, or you can certainly, when you first start off, you can open up the tutorial. Certainly that's quite useful for going back to find out how things work. And then also it has a list of kits, and these are kits to do with assets that are for Apple, iOS, Google Material Design, and even Windows devices, if that's the case for you. Also, it's got some resources certainly to do with how to learn and tutorials, etc., which are really, really useful. So first of all, I'm just going to open up the beginner tutorial to give you an idea of how the functionality works. So I open this up. Again, if you are familiar with the number of these type modern minimalistic design programs, certainly like Sketch app on the Mac, you'll be familiar with the setup. It's a lot different than what you would be familiar with if you're using something like Photoshop, which has lots going on there, a very busy UI. You'll find that it's quite clean. There's less tools and lots of things going on, and also again, because it's in development, they're adding features. So how it would work is in the center here, this is where all your work takes place. Now the good thing about XD, which again you can do in Sketch app, you can actually have these are just information here. This is just documentation. Many of these just are giving information to the user, or if you're in a shared working environment, it might have, if you're working collaboratively, it might have information to support that collaboration. So this has opportunities to put notices here and documentation and guidance within the artboards. The idea being is your design takes place on artboards, and these are the artboards here, and all the other bits are just information. So basically that's what's going to be output: the artboards, home, blog, gear, and adventure, whereas all the other ones are just guidance. So that's where your area is. It also gives you some tips of how to navigate around it. I hold the space bar and I can do that. Again, that's quite a common function you have, certainly in a number of different programs. Also, you can zoom if you have, I've got a magic mouse and I can zoom in and zoom out. If you've got a trackpad, certainly a laptop or a trackpad that's attached to your desktop, you can do that. Also, you can use Command, minus and plus. Also, if you're using a Windows, you use Command, minus and plus to navigate around. So here's all your artboards, and here's where all your design work takes place. Now, if we look over on the far left, you'll see it has a select tool, and that's what you use for moving things around. It has a keyboard shortcut. Hit V again. That's very common with lots of other design programs. Rectangle, ellipse, line tool, pen tool for certainly for making vector shapes, and then you've got your text tool, and then you've got your artboard creation tool, and then finally you've got your zoom tool. Now this panel here, and that is sort of an outline of your work. If I come back here, it's just a list of all your artboards. So your artboards are your pages, and again, if you've used things like Illustrator and certainly SketchUp, you'll be familiar with artboards. Artboards are like your pages, or in this case, artboards are your screens which you're creating ready for output. Now you make sure that the it's got the layers or the outline icon down the bottom is selected, and that will give you all the artboards. Now if I open up this artboard, the home, then it gives you a list of all the items on that artboard. So if I click on here, it will show you the button, and these are grouped together in folders. So it's important, which again, if you do design work, you'll be familiar with making sure everything is organized, it's named properly. If you're working in a shared environment, or you're going to pass on this job to a developer who's going to code it up, it's really super important that everything is organized and certainly has good documentation, but certainly how you name it is also important. Don't just have a hodgepodge of unnamed or untitled assets just called rectangle. Make sure they have a meaningful name, and also if they are sort of compound, you have a button that has a number of different mini assets within it, you can group them together in folders. Okay, so if I go back up here, I can go to all these artboards, and then finally what we do is we have what is the pasteboard, and the pasteboard then just has those items which I mentioned before. These are the sort of non-design, just documentation. So that's just on the pasteboard as a whole. That's how most design programs work. You have a pasteboard, and then you have your design work on top. Now, those are the tools. That's the outline of your project. If I go back down and switch from the layers back to this, which is brings up the symbols, this is where you would create reusable symbols. You create one symbol and you can use it many times. You edit that symbol and it will update all the instances where it's used. So that's super useful, and we'll look at that in future tutorials. If we go and certainly look at the side, on the right, you will see here, this is the properties. So if we click on certainly anything on here, an asset, we have the properties to change it. It understands that you've selected text, so you can change text, you can align, you can reposition,